Sometimes the wilderness is a part of God's plan for our lives. You know, we tend to believe that because we are born again, because we're living right, then everything must always be rosy and fine. But sometimes the wilderness is a part of God's plan. And we've got to be careful how it is that we judge our position with God by our circumstances. Is it all right to preach in here a little bit? You see, very often we are tempted and sometimes even encouraged by those around us to look on what's happening in our lives and use that as an indicator of where we are with God. But I'd like you to remember that the God of the mountain is still God in the valley. I'd like you to remember that there is a place for the wilderness and there's a place for the fertile ground. I'd like you to remember that it was the Holy Spirit that led Jesus into the wilderness. Now, when we look at the story of this event, we realize that it takes place in two very significant locations. Pardon me, I'm going to preach a little like a bishop today. It took place in two significant locations, the wilderness and Jerusalem. Now, historically, the wilderness was the place where God met the Jewish people. It was where he met them at Sinai after rescuing them and delivering them from the bondage of Egypt. Woo! I don't think you heard that. Let me just reiterate that. So God showed up. I'll go mess with you. Can I mess with you? God showed up in response to Israel's groaning, crying, and travailing because of their suffering. I want you to hear me. He told Moses that I've heard their cries and I've come down to deliver them. And so he delivered them into the wilderness. Oh yeah, I ain't going. I think you missed that just now. What do you do when God delivers you into the wilderness? What do you do when God shows up because you've been crying? He says, I come to deliver you, and escorts you into the wilderness. Woo. Is it all right to preach in here just a little bit? You see, unfortunately, too many of us do not understand the ways of God. And we believe that deliverance will always be according to our romanticized view of life. But it was in the wilderness that God shaped Israel into his covenant people. It was in the wilderness that he showed Israel that he was their provider. It was in the wilderness that he showed Israel that he was the one who cared for them. It was in the wilderness that he showed Israel that he was their source. I wonder if it's all right to preach in here. It was in the wilderness that Israel got to know his presence. And so they were led by the pillar of fire by night and the cloud by day. They learned to look for his presence and move with his presence. And the Bible tells me wherever the cloud or the pillar stopped, they stopped and they pitched their tents. And whenever it moved, they pull up their stakes and they moved. You see, some of you not gonna get too excited about this part, because this is not what we want to hear. But look on somebody and tell them there is a purpose for your wilderness experience. Like, share, comment, and subscribe. Don't forget to hit that notification bell. And for more, join us at 9 a.m. on Sunday mornings at 10 Union Square, Crossroads. If you can't be there in person, join us virtually via Facebook Live.